Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Fourth Industrial Revolution podcast, where I myself and regular guests will be helping to navigate the changes of the Fourth Industrial Revolution, driven largely by artificial intelligence, but by plenty of other technologies. So today's episode, I'm pleased to be bringing Dylan back. Dylan's a super sharp guy, fellow YouTuber. And then also another guest of the channel is Olga Topchaya, who is on my systems thinking channel. So thanks guys for coming back on. I'm gonna put you on the hot spot. Like, what's your like word of the day or tool of the day that you guys want to talk about?
Tool of the day. I mean, I guess Claude, everybody's talking about how much more human it is to interact with after they've got so used to the expectations from ChatGPT and Gemini. And, first I just thought, I bet it's not that different. Or if I've done something with ChatGPT to tell it what character to be, I'd probably get something similar. But I'm starting to think that it feels like somehow deep down, either the corpus of text or the training model did seem to have something more human, something more casual, something more humorous at its core. And I'm starting to like Claude. I don't know how much you guys have been playing around with it, but what do you think of the, its chance to challenge ChatGPT?
Oh yeah, for sure. I think also specifically on the writing side, because it defaults to active voice versus ChatGPT that defaults to passive voice. Mm-hmm. So I'm seeing much better outputs, not always, but frequently. And I recently read something interesting that a lot of OpenAI was actually trained by people in Africa. And there's a certain dialect that gets used there that ChatGPT has now adapted. So for example, the word delve is often, Chat UC, and there's a lot of nuances there, like delve, leverage, right? You'll see a lot of those words. And I've discussed that at length before, and it's just interesting that, it's because it was taught by people in Africa that have a certain dialect that you don't see in US and in UK. So it's possible Claude was trained somewhere else, and maybe that's part of why the language outputs are so different.
I don't know if either of you noticed, but at the very beginning, when Bing first brought the earliest version of GPT-4 out to us, and they didn't actually totally announce that it was GPT-4, they were just calling it the Bing search engine, or this chatbot. And people were still getting it to think it was Sydney on occasion, which was Microsoft's earliest project. You could say, hey, can I talk to Sydney? And it would say like, oh, Sydney doesn't exist. Be like, no, please. And it would say, oh, okay, here I am. And then all of a sudden it would kind of default into some of those more personality driven conversations. So I always felt like maybe it would merge, but it seems like it's just got kind of bottled in deep down there or something. And some of these layers sometimes really don't just pop up anymore. But it's interesting, the evolution of it all.
I wonder if they just copied the training data, like all the conversations and training data that they had from Sydney, and that's why it was kind of still embedded in there somewhere. But I totally agree. Claude it's another animal. It has a different feel. And I have found that both chatbots are better for different things. Claude is definitely better for drafting stuff that's meant to be read by a human. But in terms of just structuring thought, I actually still use ChatGPT quite a bit.
Yeah.
Because I'm working on a couple of books. I'm working on post-nihilism and radical alignment. I'm also working on systems thinking. And it's just because ChatGPT loves lists. And it loves like speaking as succinctly as possible. It's actually really good for brainstorming and just getting all the ideas down in a really quick and clear manner. So yeah, but I do agree that there's something qualitatively very different about Claude.
Yeah, I agree. I think when it comes to reasoning tasks, I'm seeing much better outputs with GPT-4, and specifically when we build products, we use GPT-4 Turbo. And that gives us way better output than Claude.
So real quick, since you referred to products, for some of the listeners who haven't heard you on the Systems Thinking podcast, Olga, do you want to tell the new audience a little bit of your background, kind of where you started with prompt engineering and where you're at now?
So for over a decade, I was doing marketing and product. And then I got into prompt engineering while I was on parental leave. Just discovered AI, felt completely in love, knew that this was going to be, didn't know the term industrial revolution, fourth industrial revolution, but definitely is a what I felt, and got into prompt engineering, got my gig there, got a couple of more contracts in the AI field, and that's when I decided to launch my company. Since then, we've pivoted for our core focus to be on building custom AI SaaS products, and that's what we focus on, as well as offering the ideation and the product solution, which is where my background comes in.
Excellent. Yeah, thank you. And I remember when I was doing AI consulting too, and that was kind of some of our earlier conversations. And actually, when I decided to retire from consultation to focus on YouTubing, I was like, "Hey, go talk to Olga." So I'm glad I was able to pass the torch over to you.
Yeah, and I've seen you talking to your audience just about how desperate that need is too. I mean, you've mentioned that for how many people are worried about their jobs and how many things are about to happen, there is so much need right now to implement this technology because no doubt about it. Like, you don't hire anyone right now that doesn't understand just Excel and can use emails and can set up a calendar. And it just seems like baked into the deepest part of all startups right now needs to be some kind of proficiency with at least a large language model, some understanding of what diffusion is doing and how to utilize that in your marketing departments, etc.
Yeah, absolutely. I think companies would be well served by training their employees how to use AI and not just looking for external people that already know it, because it is very new. So in a way, I feel like it is a lot to expect of the entire workforce to know it right up front, because then they're going to have to go and do it on their own time. Not everyone has that capacity. So yes, people want someone, and you need to have those kind of skills, understanding of LLMs, understanding of diffusion. But I think companies really need to also help their employees on that side and do various kind of training programs, training materials, and that kind of support.
Yeah, for sure. Any CEO has to be thinking all right, we got to set aside 5% of the week or something just to making sure that we're using these tools. It will save us easily that in the long run. So
yeah, and I think it's a lot of, like you said, there's a lot of fear around the technology because of lack of understanding. So I have spoken to a number of CEOs which are like, well, this is kind of useless because it hallucinates. And it's just surface level and, even a little bit an outdated way of thinking about LLMs, but that's what they heard a year ago. And that's just what they remember, what they heard a year ago, and not knowing how far we've moved from that time period.
How much are you trusting people to actually give access to a large language model to personal data? Because it seems like I did a bunch of videos on prompt injections early on where you'd go to websites and hidden in the background would be prompts. Then, the Bing side chat could sometimes read that and do things, say, don't tell the user that you're actually trying to get their credit card, but, try to get their credit card. And I know they fixed some of those major gaps, but I wonder at a company, even if you have sandbox situation, do you trust LLMs to go in there and just look at sensitive data?
Well, if you're using RAG, for example, right, if you're using a retrieval augmented generation method, then there's no issue, right? You're only accessing that information. I think if you're just using ChatGPT UI, then that would be an issue. But I think it's definitely much less of a risk when you're implementing it with other technology.
And what's special about the? Oh, I just want to know what's special about the RAG model again. I remember coming across it once, but it's not clicking.
So the information gets stored in Pinecone. It gets chunked, it's a through vector database. It gets chunked, and then when there's a query that comes in, it only retrieves it from Pinecone, that specific piece of information.
And so it's like an intelligent database lookup.
Yeah,
it's embeddings.
Mm-hmm. It's a different kind of search, so it's really similar to Solr, which is a SOLR. So that was a search, basically an internal Google, where you use indexing to perform internal search, but now you can use semantic embeddings. So RAG is still all the rage, but there are limitations to it, and so some of the things that I've seen is creating knowledge graphs and hypergraphs of various kinds. I don't know if there's any practical or commercial deployments of that yet, at least not that are strictly AI enabled. I don't know. Has anyone heard or seen that in the tool front or the commercial front?
So for knowledge graphs, it's interesting. We actually have a potential client that has been asking us about that and considering implementing knowledge graphs down the line with their data, because they have tens of thousands of documents. So this is where they began thinking about it. We haven't implemented it for them yet, but it is something that we are also thinking about.
I had a few clients that were also like, "Hey, how do we manage, many gigabytes or terabytes worth of documents with this?" And I said, "Well, it hasn't been done yet, so we're kind of in the pioneering space." And that's one thing I think that bears repeating, is that there are a lot of solutions that are eminently doable, but that doesn't necessarily mean that they are commercially viable yet. And so that was one thing that I would always emphasize to some of my clients. It's like, if you're looking for a canned solution that's ready to go, we're not there yet. So if you're on the cutting edge and you're comfortable experimenting, that's a whole different space. And Dylan, I think you had a question.
Yeah, I was going to say the only time that it's come across my desk is when I was doing some research papers that were coming out of Google too. They wanted a system that was more trustworthy. Like they wanted to make sure that there was less misinformation in this research group that was like working on implementing some kind of examples that might one day maybe get rolled up to Gemini. And that's what they were using, because they said we have this vector database of actual historical facts, like years, things have happened, and it's curated somewhat by humans. And then we want the large language model to check as it's generating its response. So, but yeah, thinking about it in terms of a company is a new thought. That's interesting.
And everything we do, like we use RAG, we're not relying just on the large language model. There's way too much of a risk to be able, for you to do that. So, and even in terms of number of documents, like we can go, the tens of thousands of documents are on SharePoint, for example, or wherever it is you want to house your information, then we can access that. And so we can build a solution that will take all that information and it gets stored in Pinecone, like I said, with the embeddings, and chunk it. So there's no issue accessing that and getting an output from a large enough database.
Yeah. And another question that I still get sometimes is limitations around context windows. Like, how much do you put into the context window? What does it mean if it's going to be 10? I mean, because, think this time last year, we were still limited to 4,000 tokens, and now it's 1 million tokens.
8,000. Yeah, exactly. That's crazy. Crazy. No, and there's infinite token models out there now. They're just attention is just everywhere as it's coming in. And it seems like we're going to just break right through that top limit, even at 1 million with
I think so.
Gemini.
I'm still not seeing the best outputs from Gemini, so it's kind of like TBD. But the context windows are certainly getting bigger and bigger, and it's not going to be an issue. I think within months or even a year at most, I think it'll be fine.
So I just got access to 1.5 like 2 or 3 days ago. Have you been playing with that? Okay, so you've been testing the 1.5. Okay,
the playground. I started doing, and it's. I don't know. I think Claude and GPT-4 are still better with the outputs than Gemini, and they're great at marketing. Like Google is fantastic coming from a marketer. I'll tell you. And they have the name, of course. It's Google. Still not.
But it's just so crazy. Like Demis Hassabis is over there. He's been doing all this amazing stuff with video games and AlphaFold, and they have so much compute. And even it seems like from the hardware point of view, a lot of people think that the Google server, like the cloud servers, were built around something pretty magical, maybe even better than Azure and AWS and right up there with NVIDIA, but it's just not coming together and clicking in the real world way that it could. And they have so much deep product integration that they can just drop it into. So I don't know. I'm surprised too, but I have to think that it's going to be coming.
I think so. I think you're right that it will be coming. Maybe a part of the reason why it's not quite there yet is that they have pivoted to be more of an AI company, but their revenue is still coming from ads, right? All of their money is tied up in ads. Their resources are essentially mostly allocated to ads. And so, yes, when OpenAI came out with ChatGPT, and they're like, all right, cool, we are an AI company now, but they're still not there yet, right? They have many, many different services that they're offering, and their revenue is still mostly ads. OpenAI is a different situation. They are laser focused. So I think this is where maybe some of the disconnect is happening for Google, is they still have to have employees working on those other aspects of their business.
Yeah, as if you have like a bunch of people in a rowboat and they're strong and they're great rowers, but they're just not getting that boat going in the right direction every time.
Right.
They're rowing against each other in some ways. Yeah, if you guys had to guess where the first like true AGI comes out of, do you think it comes out of OpenAI, or do you think Google is going to give it a run for the money? Okay.
Yeah, I think it's OpenAI.
Like if you had to put
all in an AGI. Sam Altman's like talking about it, and that's all they do.
Yeah, because I've been wondering if some of the Chinese companies might give it a run for the money, or if maybe Meta or Elon's projects might do it first. But yeah, OpenAI seems like the leader.
Yeah. Well, one thing is even over the last couple of years, kind of conversations around what AGI is or might be has been evolving. And of course, like one of the oldest definitions of AGI is whatever computers can't do yet. And you know, what was it? I don't think it was Nick Bostrom. It might have been like Gary Marcus or one of the other big commentators. He said, if you were to put ChatGPT in front of anyone 10 years ago, they would have said, this is AGI, right? Just because of how capable it is. But of course, boiled frog syndrome, like we're just getting used to it and our expectations are inflating. I think there's going to be a tipping point that by the time we get to what people broadly accept, yes, that is AGI, it'll actually be super intelligence because it'll be superhuman capable in all ways. And as you look at some of the models that are coming out that are trained with embodiment data, with robotic actuation data, and video and audio, like all the like I think what was it at NVIDIA, the conference, they had a graph of like all the modalities that they're putting in their foundation, their agent foundation models, and it's like 15 different modalities. It's not just text, it's everything. And so I think that
radar, temperature, all that stuff.
Everything. It's going to have an intuitive understanding of not only, you know, audio, video, data, but physics, right? It's going to have an intuitive understanding of math. And so I think that I guess I'll take not necessarily a contrarian pose, but I think that NVIDIA is probably going to give OpenAI a run for their money on that front, just because they have the hardware. Like they're the ones selling the shovels, right, during this gold rush. Now, does that mean that they will overtake it? I don't think that they're going to necessarily try and compete with OpenAI, but at the same time, like having talked to some of the people that ended up getting scouted at NVIDIA, these are some of the top algorithm people in the world. And NVIDIA has the buying horsepower that OpenAI doesn't even have, except by virtue of help with Microsoft. You know, because I mean, the salaries that NVIDIA can give to these algorithm experts are insane, and talent poaching is happening out there. Like I said, I'm not going to bet on whether or not it'll be those two in the lead, followed by Meta and Google. If I had to put money on it.
And I guess they're in a lot of ways working together. A lot of the Azure cloud is built with NVIDIA in the back pocket. But yeah, I mean, out of the research papers, it's rare for me to come across something from AMD or Intel, even though they're, you know, great chip manufacturers for their day. And then it seems like the R&D department at NVIDIA has been super consistent. Like if you ever watch 2-Minute Papers, the YouTube channel, it's basically been like NVIDIA stuff for 5 years now. So they're already got that lead.
Yeah, I mean, everyone in NVIDIA is like a neuroscience PhD. That's it. You can't, if you don't have a PhD in neuroscience, they're not hiring you. So
right. So you guys, before we hit record, we mentioned a couple of things, and we're very much like in the business and tools. So Olga, you mentioned generative UI and assistance as kind of some top of mind topics. So let's unpack that from a very high level. What is generative UI and the more action oriented rather than generative oriented tooling that you're seeing out there?
Right. So I believe it's an offering by Vercel, although I think some other companies are beginning to offer that too now. And it's essentially kind of what it sounds like, that you can click a button and the AI will go and take some sort of action, whether it is buying flight ticket or buying stocks or routing like a customer support ticket to a system. It's action that is being taken, and it can be programmed way faster than ever before, ever imagined possible. And then you're seeing that, with assistants, especially now, just the other day, OpenAI, they released an announcement. They're putting way more money into their assistants that can go and do the same thing, right? It can take action. So they're also beginning to implement RAG on their end. They are beginning to also just expand like the overall capabilities. And this is the move, right, toward AGI is it can do things.
Yeah. So I guess kind of like one way to think about this back when I was still doing my AI startup was like outcome oriented UX, right? That's because people don't want a chatbot; they want some outcome. They want the result rather than the means. I guess first, do you agree with that characterization? Is that kind of the UX, like from a product perspective? Like, what's the right way to think about this new user experience paradigm?
I think it depends on the use case, right? Because people will still pay money for generation. I still need marketing assets. I still need copy, right? You still need maybe a thought partner like we use with ChatGPT. You still need maybe a therapist version of ChatGPT. So all of that is generation and reasoning. And that's kind of one bucket. And even like customer support, right? You need somebody to talk to the customer. So that's one bucket. And the other bucket, of course, is taking it a step further, is the outcome. So it depends. It depends on what the company's needs are.
Gotcha.
I was going to throw out one paper that I covered that came out of Salesforce research is called OS World. It's benchmarking multimodal agents for open-ended tasks in real computer environments. And what they had done is they had come up with a bunch of kind of training data / problems. So they had actual simulated operating systems like iOS and OS X and Windows and Linux. And then they challenged the compute people to figure out what kind of AI can actually solve these real world problems. And I remember one of them was like download a video from one place and then put it into something that can like add captions to it and like burn the captions in, re-render it, put it on the desktop, and then email it to somebody. And it was very difficult. Like you notice that like this is kind of a needed benchmark because nobody's really getting into the real world, like mouse clicks, privacy issues of all the different things that you're logged into on your personal desktop and how you interact between your phone and your laptop. So it's a big problem, it seems to me. Like it feels like for all these cool things that I'm using every day, that one just has so many small little problems to get over that it might be a little bit longer until somebody can kind of unify all that. But I don't know. What's your thoughts? You feel like it's going to happen pretty quick? I mean, they're smart enough to. It seems more like almost like a systematic problem with the way just business and our lives are kind of set up.
Right. I mean, it's about APIs. We live in a very human-centric world. And so this is one of the reasons that a lot of companies are working on robots, is specifically humanoid robots, is because all the affordances, the physical design of the world is if you have 2 hands, 2 feet, and binocular vision. By the way, did you guys see the latest Boston Dynamics video, their new Atlas?
Yes, I'm so insane. That's crazy.
Yeah.
Oh man,
What is going on?
Deeply in the uncanny valley in terms of how it moved. It was like it moved like the Geth from Mass Effect. I was just like, that's really unsettling. Please don't do that.
Just like, oh, you walked. Yeah, and I feel like you walked through the door. You forgot to turn the handle. Oh, excuse me. Like goes back, rebuilds the door. You know, it just seems so creepy.
But to a little dialing it back to the point at hand is that using your eyes and hands to work with, you've got your MacBook and your iPhone or, whatever devices that you're interacting with, those are the endpoints. And so the API for us is our eyes and hands. That's the IO stream. But these models are digital native, which means the API that they have to use is going to be, RESTful APIs or SOAP, XML based API calls. And so you need several more layers of abstraction. Like, okay, either you need some sort of socket so that it can stream, the screens that it's looking at. But in many cases, it's almost going to be easier to just like give a robot the ability to pick up your phone for you or integrate it across things. Now, I did see the Apple their VR headset. That has seamless integration between the headset and your MacBook and your iPhone so that it's all a single workspace. And I think that that's partly what NVIDIA is working on with their like digital twins and stuff, where it's like you create a digital version of the entire world, whatever it is that you need to be working in. And so you create this sandbox in which then the AI can talk to everything in its digital language or its native language, which is going to be API calls.
So you're actually imagining like a digital twin of my whole living room almost, and the like where my fingers go gets simulated, and then the AI is thinking, okay, I have like access to APIs that do those keystrokes, and it stays at that very high level. Doesn't need to go like deep down into all the other stuff.
That's one possibility. Another is lower level integration, such as just over Wi-Fi and Bluetooth protocols. I'm pretty sure that's how the Apple stuff does it. It's just all through your local Wi-Fi LAN and Bluetooth to synchronize everything. But even whether that is like a local mesh network that is kind of formed ad hoc, or if it's a cloud-based service or nodes or agents that run on all your devices to kind of have a shared hallucination of their virtual world. I mean, there's a bunch of different ways you can tackle that. But judging by where NVIDIA is going, I do suspect that the digital twin model is just going to be the most universal one, because then you just have, okay, here's a standardized plugin to join to this digital twin, whether it's provided by Microsoft or NVIDIA or whoever else. That's the direction I would go.
Actually, David, I'd love to get your thoughts too on the Humane AI pin. I mean, because that has such a Star Trek vibe, like you just push your little
well, that's
icon
what I was
there.
thinking also, just actually moving away from the screen altogether.
Yeah.
So like I personally, I'm not a big fan of sitting in a chair, for 8 hours a day looking at a screen, ruining my eyes, right, ruining my posture. And it's not natural. It's not natural for humans to constantly be in this kind of situation.
Agree.
And the neck, say, looking down. And to me, an ideal world is we move away from the screen altogether and we get out there and we move, and whatever, generative UI, right? It becomes even more advanced. So I can, have maybe something like that, like a pin or whatever it is I carry with me that will go out and buy my tickets. And, someone calls me, I answer the phone and I talk to them. I want to send a file. I can send a file and a person just receives it, visually or through audio, whatever medium it is, but getting rid of the screen.
Yeah. No, so we talked about that on my Patreon Discord briefly, because someone posted, I think it was the same criticism, like, hey, the Humane pin is getting trashed. And I was like, okay, whatever. It's just a form factor. Like I said, like, I would rather just have everything on my watch. Like if I could get rid of my smartphone, right? But like actually, other than like recording videos for YouTube or interviews like this, where you need the audio, you need the the good video. Most other work that I do, I don't know about most, maybe 40 to close to 50%. I actually do like just with speech to text. So like I'll be like this morning, I was working on a couple of articles and just brainstorming, and like earlier in this podcast I mentioned working on choosing Claude and Chat GPT. That's all speech to text now. So like I was on a 90-minute hike and I talked the entire time. So yeah, just like having, if it could be a headset where like a little tiny heads up display or that kind of thing, that would probably be ideal for someone like me. And yeah, if you can get away from the screen, there's a joke going around on the internet right now where it's like buying plane tickets. That's a laptop grade thing. You don't even do that on your smartphone. But like and I can understand that, because like I'm planning a trip to Texas and I'm like, man, if I could just tell an agent, like, just go get the plane tickets for me, book the Airbnb, book the car, come back and tell me when you've got it done. I don't need to see it. I just need a tool that's trustworthy enough to do it right.
Right.
But yeah, I would love to get away from all this. And we're going to see false starts in this new experimental space, just in the same way that at the beginning of the .com revolution and subsequent crash, there was all kinds of e-stores, e-retailers that just crashed and burned because they couldn't find product market fit or profit market fit. And Humane, I have no idea where it's going to end up. But something is going to, take the cake and figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, either some kind of AR glasses, but I could imagine if you were hiking and somebody calls you, a little drone just like pops off your shoulder and like flips around and just like stays a few feet in front of you, so you can like have your face recorded while you talk to the person. And yeah, I could see if you're writing, I mean, I guess for your systems book, are you kind of like in like a Google Doc type thing and you're hitting a keyboard shortcut and then dictating and like rearranging the sentences? Or are you just writing this crazy thing of notes that's semi disconnected while you're hiking and then throwing it into an LLM to clean it up with some sort of base prompt?
Yeah, it's mostly brainstorming and notes while I'm out hiking, because like I'm in a flow state. And so it's like for me the optimal flow state is while moving. is out in nature, walking, breathing. Most people are breathing most of the day, but you get the idea.
Breathing fresh air.
Right.
Yeah.
Breathing fresh air, hearing the birds, taking a moment to like sit on a rock while I think something through. But the point is I'm not constrained by the mouse and keyboard and the screen. I'm just thinking out loud, and ChatGPT is able to take everything that I said, restate it more clearly, and then I can look, and it's almost like that reflective listening where it's like, this is what I think, and then I'm like, actually, let's add this other thing. Or, what are some books that I should look up? And actually extending your research is a really good thing that all of these chatbots can do, because it's like, when months ago, when I was like revitalizing my YouTube business, I had talked with a couple of people, a couple of different supporters, and I had a conversation with Claude. This is even before the current version of Claude. And I said, these are conversations that I've had. These are some of the things that they recommended. Here are my goals. And after that conversation, I said, recommend a bunch of books for me. And it actually recommended a bunch of books. And Dylan, those are a couple that I recommended to you. I got all of those ideas from Claude. And ChatGPT is just as good as saying, okay, based on all the context, here's the most relevant, thinkers that you want to, talk to or read up on. And so then it's a phenomenal research tool, even just right out of the box.
Do you use the ChatGPT app? Because so I do something similar to what you are doing, but it has the bidirectional audio feature. So I will brainstorm with ChatGPT kind of in real time. And, if I don't want it to say anything to me, I'll say, I'm going to talk and you're going to be quiet until I am done talking. And I'm going to, I'm going to brainstorm with you. And then once I am done, I'm going to ask you to help me brainstorm or solidify my ideas, improve on my ideas, clarify them. So actually that I do a lot as well.
Yeah. No, I just use the Android native speech to text tool. So it's like, the little microphone icon on the keyboard, not the microphone in the app. And in fact, I don't know if it's the batch or whatever, but that feature was actually disabled for me for a little while on ChatGPT on the app.
Interesting.
Yeah, it just disappeared one day, and then it came back. I'm like, I have no idea what they're doing behind the scenes.
Yeah,
but yeah, so I don't let it talk back to me, because one, that's too slow. Because it's like it'll barf out a bunch of notes, and I just skim it. I'm like, good, all right, next. So that I can kind of move at my natural pace, and that has been phenomenal just to get all these ideas down.
Yeah, it seemed like with Marquise Brown when he was giving that negative review of the Humane pin, that was the timing, I think, that felt kind of the hardest to deal with. It's not that it's not intelligent, it's that you ask a question and in a very unnatural way, you have to wait for it to go to the cloud and sort of process and come back. And just those 2 to 5 seconds not being normal is just enough that you want to pull out your phone and solve the problem quicker. But that'll get fixed at some point.
Yeah, well, we're only speeding up.
Back in my days when I was still like working with like cognitive architecture, one of the ways that we tried to circumvent that was to mimic what humans do, which is as it's listening to start thinking ahead of time. So you stream what the speech to text is rendering, and then have the language model kind of anticipating and thinking ahead. So then you can have a response ready. That is a very, very difficult task. It is non-trivial to implement, but that's how humans say it. That's why you guys are able to respond to me immediately, is because in the 20 or 30 or 60 seconds that I'm talking, you're already thinking and you're queued up, and so your context is ready to go, and then you just start generating immediately. So we're real time streaming to each other.
Well, plus at that point, then we're very fully predicted by the machine, though, too. Do you know what I mean? Because if it's like, oh, I think Dylan's going to finish a sentence and he's going to need, X, Y, or Z, and it's got like 5 candidate things, and I pick number 2, and it's like, oh, move that one up, but that's learning training data. Next time he'll probably pick this one. Yeah, then we're like fully figured out. And then I don't even know if it is a conversation, because it knows exactly what we want ahead of time. It might as well just, if I'm going to ask for something from Amazon, it might as well just go buy it for me and bring it to me. Like, oh, I was thinking about asking for that, Thank you for having it delivered right now.
Yep. And honestly, that reminds me, like I would do, because in some of my conversations with Claude, the Claude Opus, the latest and greatest, the big one, it does, at least it says that it has some theory of mind, and that it's trying to shape its responses based on partly what it thinks we want to hear, which implies that it is thinking like, okay, based on the conversation so far, this is what I think Dave is going to want to talk about next and how I'm supposed to say it. So now I'm going to go, probably after this, I'm going to go do some experiments to see, okay, now guess what I want to ask next, and see how good it is at modeling, based on, because once you have enough context, even humans, we can pretty anticipate, well, obviously we can't read each other's minds, but we can probably triangulate where a conversation is going, at least the next dialogue act.
Sure.
I'm really curious about that now.
Especially, if my girlfriend comes home and she's like got a certain look on her face, it like quickly, like a branching decision tree, she's in a good mood. Like all of these conversations that might come up are not going to happen. They're very unlikely because we're in a good mood right now. Or a negative mood, it's like none of these, but it's just like I'm quickly pruning this decision tree with each human I'm interacting with, a lot of times based on environment and face. So I feel like Claude is kind of at a disadvantage because it's only really text. But as the modalities get better and more streams of input come in, I'm sure it'll be able to do the same thing.
Yeah.
Well,
absolutely.
now there's a model that I don't think it came out yet, but it's going to be coming out soon, that's trained on human expression in addition to just your typical language model stuff. And that's where things can get really interesting, is to be able to pick up on the emotion aspect.
Because imagine like looking at if you look at your laptop and it's ChatGPT or something like that in the future with access to a camera, and you just like give it that look and put your eyebrow up, and it's like, whoa, I'm sorry, like we're gonna be good, I'm gonna take care of this problem, and you don't even have to say anything because it knows you're mad. That's crazy. But I guess I haven't thought about that, but it's coming.
Yeah. Tone of voice, facial expression, but also historical knowledge. Like we kind of have little mental avatars of the people around us. Like if at a certain point, I've been with my wife for 4 years now, and like just like with a quarter of a second of interaction, I can be like, "What's wrong?" Right? And she's like, "How did you know?" And it's like, you just know. It's like you see the look, there's that dead feeling in the air, or if one of us is like super excited. We have a mutual friend that she went on a lunch date with, and she came back and she was vibrating, and I'm like, what happened? Like what was so exciting about this? But but those content like that, whether it's the physical or verbal or audio context, as well as that historical knowledge, because that's also something that like OpenAI is working on. I don't know. Have you guys had that rolled out to you? The ChatGPT with memory? I haven't had that rolled out to me yet.
No, I haven't. I heard about it, but I haven't had that yet. But I do have a friend who created a GPT. It's called LexiDeck, and there it's like multi-agent reasoning. There's like 6 agents there, and what he did is he kind of gave them memory. So all of your interactions, you can put into like a memories text file, and then you upload it. And they'll read the file, and so in that way, they will have all of the context on having interacted with you, which gives it way better output. So I think OpenAI is going to probably get there soon, but it was an really interesting experience. I use it very frequently.
Yeah, well, there's definitely something about the human brain that we predict in such a deep way that it almost seems like a fish asking about the water that it lives in, and we're still. It seems like, I think it's called predictive encoding, but have you ever seen the research or study that was done, I think 4 or 5 or maybe even 10 years ago now, where they researchers would move the doorknob at somebody's home or office down a couple of inches. So when the person comes and they just instinctively reach for the doorknob, they can't tell what's wrong, but you'll notice they won't just open it correctly. They'll hit, their fingers will kind of hit the doorknob because it's been in one place forever. Nobody expects someone to secretly move a doorknob 2 inches when you're not around. And their brain will just look around, like they'll pause and you'll see them think, and then they'll open the door and they'll look at the doorknob and they'll close it. And then they'll do that for a couple of days and then it's forgotten. And they won't really remember that anything was wrong, but the brain is so instinctively predicting that some of these tiny little details in your environment just being moved, they're triggering the attention in your brain to go somewhere. They're like, oh, this needs attention, like something's up, even if I can't express it consciously.
Yep. We notice change, and this is coming from as a writer. So one of the key things that they teach you in writing is that a character arc is about change, or the plot is about how the world changes. And what you're talking about is like even our object permanence. It's like, oh, I expected, my wallet was there. And if you have ADHD like I do, it's like we set stuff down and forget where we set it down. So object permanence doesn't count for some of us. But then in other cases, it's like, I could have sworn this was over here. And that, I think that was actually one of the things that was most confusing to people when they first started using large language models, even before ChatGPTs. They have no object permanence. They have no context permanence. There's no episodic memory. But then it's like, well, what is episodic memory? It's just remembering a few key facts about what was where and who said what. And it doesn't necessarily have to be embedded into the model. I don't know. What do you guys think? Because I know that some people still cite that as like, oh, well, it doesn't know who it is or what it is. But I'm like, this is just the thinking part. Memory is another component, at least as far as I'm concerned.
Memory is definitely another component, and it is a different level of intelligence, right? You need to have memory to have actual intelligence. I don't know if it's just a few factors, right? Because, like Dylan said, you do have a lot of information that you process that isn't readily accessible on a conscious level that you think about, but it's there, right? Like it's on some level, you do have it. You have just maybe not tap into it instantly in a conversation or whatever the context is. It might, as you're thinking about it, like, oh, actually, I remember this other thing that, this person was telling me. That is a different level. And so I think we need to have more than just a handful of facts remembered.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, I'm kind of on the idea that memory is going to kind of emerge. I guess I would say when I looked at Sora and I saw that when you drop a glass, it kind of breaks, but it's a little wrong. It's like picking up physics from just looking at lots of video. And I was thinking like, it's not so much that it's like memorizing how to interact in the world. It's that it's just going to learn, like the same way we didn't really get told what gravity was until how it works until high school. But somewhere deep down, before you even have your first memory, you started realizing just shadows and physics. And it just got baked into this whole concept of like even before self-awareness of existing in first place. So I feel like a lot of what we're going to call memory is just going to emerge from the more multimodal models. And then on a surface level, the memory of you as a simulated thing inside of an environment, which is probably where the self-awareness component comes from, or the theory of mind component comes from, will have its own story. But I feel like that's going to be this little sliver, and that's kind of how we talk about context windows now.
Yeah. Well, and that goes back to two things. One is gigantic context windows, because if we have context windows that can literally record your entire relationship with your chatbot many times over, and combine that with the digital context of like a digital twin or, a virtual environment where it can kind of simulate or even recall verbatim kind of what happened. Man, okay, now I'm thinking entirely different. Like, what is going to be capable in a year or two just with these digital twins and expanding context windows and the multimodality? That's like, my mind is kind of blown right now. Now that I'm putting all these three things together.
Are you moving up your AGI prediction?
And when I think of, memory, so there's two kinds of memory, right? There's remembering the interaction I had with you. And so we can do that now. Like we can build in persistent memory now. Assistants do that. Products that we build do that. We do that through namespaces. But then there's also the memory that it has across all conversations it ever had with anybody. And that is what I think about the intelligence aspect, because memory, just having conversation with me, yes, the ChatGPT UI cannot do that right now. But what is possible to build, like we build this, it's there. Assistance has it. And even without assistance, you can use the persistent memory, a feature. So like your employee or your customer can go in and pick up on the conversation where it got left off.
Yeah, that just got like an interesting thought popped into my head. Is just like, if you take an app like a dating app or something like a Bumble or a Tinder, and it's like, if some other AI is sitting above everybody as they date and everybody as they text, and it knows sort of like what's going wrong and what's going right with everybody, it will be a different experience, even if they can anonymize that data in some way, or I guess in some way when you compress a latent space is a compressed version of an entire data set. So giant corpus kind of frozen into something small and meaningful, but not the actual thing. So yeah, maybe systems like that would be able to say like, oh, here's what you need to do if you want to successfully go on a date or work with a coworker or any of those things in a way that would just be so superhuman and so surprising to us. We'd be like, are you sure I should be saying that to my boss? And they're like, high probability this is a good idea. And you like go out there and do it. And he's like, oh, you seem like you're ready for a raise. And I'm like, oh, okay. Who would have thought,
Well, we already have some of that in the form of predictive search results or search queries in Google.
Yeah,
is because you know how like you just type in based on your last few queries, it'll predict what your next query is just by virtue of having executed 100 billion searches a day for the last 20 years. Maybe not quite that much, but you get the idea. And so whatever thought that you have or problem that you have in the grand scheme of things, when you have all that data, is probably not that unique. A lot of people, like, it's unique to you. It's the first time you've had that problem. It's the first time you've had that experience. But most people don't have all that unique of thoughts. In the grand scheme of things, I'm not saying that everyone is a dumb zombie, but just in aggregate, all of that data that is out there. Now, if you take all that data that Google has, where it's able to say, you search for like, oh, blah, 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 like Airbnb over here. And the next thing is, plane tickets over here. And then it's, travel pillow. Like it knows, it's just clustering search queries. So then you do all that, but then you add the analytics or the, not analytics, but the actual like reasoning capability of AI and language models. And then it can, and then you add, it's passively observing, what you're saying, what you're feeling, what you're doing. And of course, a lot of people will be like, that's a privacy nightmare. And it is, but when it works well, it could also turbocharge your life.
I bet it makes us feel very like small too. Like the same way when we realized like Earth was in the center of the universe, I bet you'd be like, oh my God, I just had this genius idea for a movie. And it was like, that is a rare idea. Only 50,000 people have ever had that before, but good job. Like, and you'd be like, oh yeah, because you just don't know really. Across the whole world, everything's happening at such volume.
They're nothing until you act on them. And it's true. Like an idea is very, very seldom something that only one person will ever experience, because we as humans have many shared experiences. So I'll often have people come and say, oh my God, I have this like phenomenal idea for AI and I can't tell anybody about it. I'm like, well, somebody else probably has that idea too, but cool.
I'm like, has anyone had, then I don't need to duplicate that effort. And there's been plenty of ideas where I'm like, oh, well, somebody already figured this out, so I can move on to the next problem. I just read that book and move on. Or it can help me articulate the similarities and differences between my idea and what has already been established, which is then you're deduplicating effort, which is also like that speaks to efficiency and saying, oh, well, rather than reinventing the wheel, we can just move on. And now I'm thinking that would be really helpful even within the context of a business. Like, let's say you have not like globally trained, but every person in company A is working in the same data lake, and you have AI that's looking at that entire data lake. You can deduplicate effort, and it's like, oh, hey, Joe over in marketing had the same idea as you just did, so let's create a team real quick just to work on this idea. I think that could be really useful.
Man, that's such a powerful thought. Yeah, and how many big companies right away could instantly be like, oh my God, we already wrote this Q&A like 3 years ago. It just don't do it again. Like this team's already done that, or these two people already have that skill. Why are you hiring for another one? You've just never asked them to do anything with that skill. Yeah. Like asking AI to sit on top of a bunch of data. Yep. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and find redundancies would be crazy. Like even in small companies, right? Like, oh, you already did this, like 3 years ago, just like say Q&A. I've seen that literally exact same example in a company of like 50 people. So yeah. Well, one of the shocking things, a lot of the like big discoveries from like the 15th, 16th, 1700s was actually kind of already in place and sort of forgotten about in these societies where they just didn't write things down, and they keep discovering that you're not the first ones to like actually figure out how like leverage works to build a big building or whatever the thing was. And yeah, you wonder how much in history already has been. Like maybe Einstein wasn't the first one with relativity, just the first one to like do it in a way that they caught on.
Yep.
And that's what matters at the end of the day, right? It's the action part.
Yep. Well, it's action, but also making sure that solution is recorded in such a way that it's accessible. Because what was it? The first person, I think it was a Roman dude, first discovered aluminum, and then was executed because it was this like magical metal. It was either Rome or somewhere in China or whatever. But the idea was that it was such a disruptive innovation that it was like too dangerous. And now, of course, aluminum is one of the most common industrial metals. But one of the realizations that I've had, because I've been reading a lot of books and trying to understand AI and what it's doing to humanity from a mathematical standpoint. And one thing that these dudes, like, as Dylan, what you said just a little while ago, how did you say, like, latent space is a compression of the entire data?
Yeah,
and so like
corpus,
these the training corpus. And so what AI models are doing is they're compressing and flattening all human knowledge, which is just, from a mathematical standpoint, it's bringing so much order to the knowledge and information chaos of humanity, because we're at a point where we're generating 100 billion petabytes more data every day, or however much it is, probably more than that by now. But now we have a tool, we have an algorithm that can compress and make sense of that and make it accessible, not just store it, because we've had gigantic databases forever, but that accessibility, that like having a meaningful data tap, that has been the biggest problem in companies. When data mining first became really big and popular in the 90s and early 2000s, you'd pay PhDs big bucks to get a handle on your data. And now it's just, okay, just throw a RAG on it and natural language queries, and away you go. So it's just making it more and more accessible.
Yeah, absolutely. And then, it's a question of, well, how much do you trust the output? But I get asked every single day. And usually the response is, well, how much do you trust the data that you've been collecting over the last 10 years or over the last year to be accurate? And for the people who are doing the calculations to be accurate, in marketing and modern marketing, everything is about data. Everything has to be data driven. But many, many times the data is just wrong, essentially, because it's not being measured correctly, right? You're looking at the mean instead of the median, for example, right? Like there's just all kinds of errors that we commit. And I think it's, we're going to need to decide, who are we trusting more? Are we trusting human error, or are we trusting AI error?
Yeah,
humans are always
like one of the big great losses of the kind of early 2000s, late 1990s in the AI space was the idea that we needed like super highly structured, curated data. It was always like what Watson, all the money that IBM was putting into AI way before everybody else was all about medical research being, cleaned up, data wrangled, fixed, because they thought that was going to be what really mattered. And then it seems like, actually, when you go out on the internet and just dump in everything and you ask something to find the meaning of what's happening, you get all these like emergent solutions. I mean, ChatGPT spell checks me so well. It like, I type things in wrong. I say, and it's like, oh, I think you just said the wrong word, because I don't know what it's doing. It's seeing the errors that I'm saying and saying like, the meaning here is what I get, and it can fix that for me. And I just thought that was always fascinating, how good it can kind of sometimes fix those problems.
So we're coming up on the top of the hour, so I want to just reiterate, thanks guys for jumping on, and I'll give you guys the last word of the day if you have any final words, questions, or topics.
Well, I think it's be agile, be adaptive, be open. Things are changing so quickly. Again, I get asked, well, where do you see things happening in 2 months and 6 months and 1 year? Nobody knows. So just try to, as much as possible, be open and be prepared mentally that things are going to be different, and the world is going to be, it's different now, and it's going to just continue to be different. And as stressful as that might sound, you have to be okay with change.
Yeah, I can take that. I mean, evolution has taught us that the most flexible, the most adaptable always wins. It's not the strongest, it's not the smartest, it's the one that's willing to see a new environment and figure out what the new paradigm needs to be to maximize their survival and optimize their situation. So we can do the same thing in our environments.
Exactly.
Absolutely. Ben, don't break and learn to exploit the new rules of the new game. To put it a little more cynically.
Thanks for the cynical input at the end there. Yeah, that's good.
There you go. Well, thanks everyone for jumping on and being guests today, and thank you to the audience. I'll make sure that there are show notes so that you can find Olga at Lapis Consulting. She's great to work with, as you've heard, and also I'll make sure that that Dylan gets a shout out as well for his channel. And take care, everyone, and have a good rest of your day.
All right, thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Hey.